So good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second Emerging Ideas event. My name is Shannon Watson. I'm the founder and executive director of Majority in the Middle. So if this is your first introduction to our group, welcome. The goal of Majority in the Middle is to make our political and civic culture better by identifying ways that partisanship and division has been systematized. We are asking a lot of questions about why things are the way they are. We're looking for places where division exists and wondering if it actually needs to. And we're hosting a space for people who are interested in politics to gather in the middle without vilification and without blame for being on one side or the other. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, you are welcome here. I've personally been really looking forward to this conversation. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to give an extra special thank you to the attendees who were willing to chip in a few dollars when claiming their ticket. I'm not going to embarrass people by reading off their names, but please know that every dollar helps and we absolutely appreciate your support. A couple of housekeeping points as we get started. You've probably already noticed this Zoom is in meeting mode, not webinar mode. So you do have the potential to be on camera or on mic. Take a second to mute yourself if you haven't already. You can leave your camera on or off, it's up to you. We are going to spotlight the speakers, so they should be taking up the majority of your screen. So it's up to you whether you want to leave your camera on or off. We do encourage social media interaction during the event. Use hashtag #emergingideas. I'll share our social handles in the chat in case it's hard to find us. Our moderator has a handful of questions, and then we're going to go to audience Q&A. So if you have a question, I think it's best to put it in the chat, and then Jay can either call on people or take those directly from the chat. The event is being recorded, will be available for viewing on our YouTube page sometime in the near future. I want to manage expectations. This may not happen soon, so don't go look for it tomorrow. We have until 7 p.m. with our panelists, but we're also going to be leaving the Zoom room open for a half an hour after the event to give you all a chance to network or give feedback or continue the discussion. So I think that's it. We will get to it. Joining us for today's discussion are three people who I really super admire. They are effective, they have lasting impact, and they don't normally seek out a spotlight, which is exactly why I'm so honored they all said yes to sharing with us today. Our moderator for the panel is Jay Olstad, a multiple Emmy and Edward R. Murrow Award winner who has pivoted from the field of TV journalism to using what he's learned over the years to coach others. Jay helps find and tell the best story, and today he's going to help us have the best conversation. So please welcome our moderator, Jay Olstad.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you for including me, and welcome everyone. Obviously, important topic, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. As I told the group beforehand, I'm just happy to be a part of the same screen as everyone else. So I appreciate that. So let's introduce our panelists. First up, Kate Cimino joined the Citizens League as executive director in September 2020. Prior to that role, she worked at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs for 13 years, serving as the executive director of the Humphrey Policy Fellows Program and assistant director of the school's Center for the Study of Politics and Governance. In this role, she oversaw the center's portfolio of outreach programs, engaged in fundraising and donor relations, and convened groups for learning experiences, and built collaborative partnerships with legislators and leaders from business, government, and nonprofit sectors. Kate, who reportedly plays a mean bassoon, is currently chair of the board of directors at the MacPhail Center for Music. Hopefully, maybe we'll hear the bassoon later, who knows? Originally from Buffalo, New York, Kate now lives in Minneapolis with her husband and son. Next up is Nate Garvis. He is the president of Naked Civics, a strategy and design firm that helps organizations thrive in times of unpredictability and volatile social change by creating pathways that combine value creation with social values. He helps leaders move beyond being responsible and into the world of leading communities forward and being rewarded in the marketplace at the same time. He is a former public affairs officer of a Fortune 30 company and the co-founder of Studio E, which is a diverse learning community of individuals from nearly every sector. He is a senior fellow at the Babson College Social Innovation Lab, which is a global leader in the intersection of entrepreneurial action and social good. And finally, Mariah Levison runs the Minnesota State Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution, where she uses collaborative processes and the science of human relations to help government and stakeholders improve relationships, build trust, and develop wise and durable solutions to seemingly intractable issues. She has been teaching conflict resolution and doing education and social emotional literacy skills for 20 years throughout Chicago, New York, and Minnesota. Mariah has a master's degree in international affairs from Washington University in St. Louis and completed a Humphrey Policy Fellowship at the University of Minnesota. So please help me welcome all of our panelists. And after hearing all of that, you can understand why I just feel blessed to be a part of this, this virtual conversation. So thanks, everyone. So let's start with the first question. We talked about your backgrounds. You are the experts, and oftentimes you're behind the scenes. So this is you're in front of the screen now, but some of our audience members may not have heard of you or the organizations that you're part of. So please just give us a quick overview of your role. And Nate, why don't we start with you?
I have trouble with the word expert. I think I have a lot of expertise, but I like to say I'm aggressively unaccredited in what I do. I'll start actually. My role is really about my purpose. My purpose in life is to strengthen the civic health of the communities I live in, whether that's a global or national or local, and to be as creative as possible in connecting ideas, people, institutions with this idea of designing our way into a better tomorrow. The culture that you create along the way with doing that is actually, I suppose, maybe the secret sauce that all three of us know how to concoct. But my role is oftentimes not just convener, but to actually be the reframer and the recontextualizer of conversations.
Great. Kate?
Thanks. It's really good to be here with folks that I've known and considered friends and fellow schemers and collaborators for many years. Nate and Brian and I, over the years, have had lots of conversations about exactly what we're talking about tonight. So really pleased to be here, and thanks for all for joining. My name is Kate Cimino, and Nate, you got me thinking about my purpose, which for me, I get so inspired by that spark of understanding or connection between people that can then shift the way people think about or approach problems or challenges. And I've always loved that type of work, and currently, have worked in the public policy space for a long time, but really I'm about the people doing the public policy work. That's really where my passion comes out. So right now, I lead the Citizens League. I've been there almost a year as executive director. We're about a $1 million budget organization. We have 6 full-time staff, but the Citizens League is nearly 70 years old and has a long history in Minnesota of being involved in helping people create good policy ideas and solutions, and inspiring more people to get involved in public policy and issues that matter to them, to use their voice in civic life. So it's my honor to lead such a great organization that has been part of Minnesota for a really long time. And previously, as you mentioned, Jay, in the intro, worked at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. I'm going to give out a shout out to my former colleague. Both of us are now former Humphrey folks. Mike, it's good to have you here. And so I'm happy to speak tonight about some examples of legislator programming, both in my former role at the Humphrey School and currently that we do at the Citizens League. But I know we'll get into that in a little bit, Jay.
Great. And thank you for correcting me on your pronunciation.
Oh, no worries. You're like the millionth person. It's fine.
And Mariah.
Thanks. Well, I am also so pleased to be here and hoping that we'll do more scheming even in the midst of this panel, and bounce off of each other's good ideas and come up with even more ways to be helpful in this work. So I'll also follow Nate and Kate's lead and talk about purpose first, which is something I always advise people that I'm working with to do. So I think the thing that I love the most about my work is similar to what Kate was saying, moments when folks who really thought that they were on different sides of things and had nothing in common and couldn't understand each other and, really didn't see the value in each other or each other's perspectives really have a breakthrough moment and say, oh, wow, I might still not agree with your idea about the solution to this issue, but I really see that you're coming from a good place and it makes sense to you the way that my view of it makes sense to me. And now we can work together. Even if we don't agree, we can still respect each other and work together. And I would say that those are almost spiritual moments to me. Those are really powerful moments when folks really make those shifts. And then they can lead to really meaningful policy impacts too. And sometimes those are really, I've had the privilege to work on things where consensus was built on contentious policy issues that have been stuck for, years, if not decades, and led to really big changes in systems. And that's incredibly powerful. And I feel incredibly honored to have been a part of that. But it's really sort of those micro moments when I see folks make those shifts and bridge those divides that are really the most impactful to me. So I get to see that work because I lead the state's Office for Collaboration and Dispute Resolution, which was in part came out of my Humphrey Policy Fellowship project. So Kate was running the program and I was a fellow in the program. The office had existed in the 80s, went away in the early 2000s, and then came back in 2013 as a result of some work that some policy fellows, including myself, did. So the office does three primary things. We help to build consensus on contentious public issues at the state or local level. That's kind of the biggest thing that we do. But then we also build the state's capacity to do that work. So we work with state and local government, elected and staff, to figure out how to better collaborate, resolve disputes, bridge divides, engage with the public in more meaningful ways. And then we also work a little bit at the community level through some nonprofit dispute resolution centers that we fund and support, but we're primarily focused on government and stakeholders to public policy issues.
Great. Awesome. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And the first question really kind of will set the stage, I guess, besides the one we just talked about. But how does our current level of polarization affect your work with elected officials and with the quote unquote normal people who want this left-right balance? And whoever wants to go first. Mariah, how about you?
Sure, I can do that. So folks ask me all the time if my work is getting harder. I've been in this job for maybe 8 years and then did other things at a community level similar before. And for a long time, I said, I didn't think it was getting harder. And for the most part, the kind of collaborative approaches that we use, bringing government officials and stakeholders together to build consensus on contentious public issues, really works reliably and much more easily than I think most of us would think, listening to the news and hearing all the gloom and doom about how divided we are. I'm always amazed at how predictably these things work when we set up really good processes and bring good facilitative leaders into a room and take the time and start with relationship and trust building before we go at the issues themselves, that we make progress. It's not a, it's not always everyone's first choice solution at the end, but we make progress. But in the last couple of years, I do think it has started to get a little bit harder. We have always started by going slow and building trust up front. And that trust takes a little bit more time to build these days, I think, than it used to. Folks' different aspects of their identities have lined up with their politics more than they used to be in the past when there was more diversity between political parties. And so folks really are a little bit more different from each other than they used to be. And then we have, this media environment that's changed a lot and that amplifies stereotypes. And so I think it takes folks a little bit longer to find those shared goals and shared values and shared identities that I think they still have. Everybody wants, clean water and good schools and a robust economy, even if they, have different ideas about how we go about it. But it takes a little bit longer, I think, for folks to believe that they have those things in common. So we need to go a little bit slower. So that's one of the ways that I've seen the increase in polarization impact the work that I do.
Mm. Nate, how about you?
I don't do as much direct work on traditional public policy that Mariah and Kate do, but I see the construct the same way that Mariah does, is that our digital environment the business model for our digital environment is to actually not only hyper connect us, but to hyper isolate us and put us in these echo chambers. Now we have artificial intelligence making sure that we do that as well. We're pixelating in our digital conversations. When it comes to policy makers themselves, and I guess I'm going to pull upon past experience at Studio E, it's really a matter of delabeling them. But I would say that that's the case with every one of us as individuals. We, as Mariah said, we walk around with these identities. And the practice that I've engaged in is to actually relabel people. So when we build trust, we ask questions that actually have absolutely nothing to do with public policy. We ask questions like, what was your favorite band in high school? Because there's no right or wrong answer to that. Maybe there is a wrong answer, who knows? But anyway, so the idea is to actually turn labels into first names. People don't trust titles, they don't trust labels, they don't have empathy for labels. They have empathy for first names. So the practice is really about getting to that point where you actually are having first name conversations. But in answer to your question, Jay, is that quite frankly, the polarized environment is what gave rise to my business, is that our political class increasingly is unable or unwilling to actually create compromise in the middle. And so I went off to search for other institutional tools out there to actually forward designs that have the same impact, but we don't have to pass a law to experience that impact. So I started tracking this polarization maybe some 20 years ago, and tracked what I saw as the rise of the angertainment industry, and it's only gotten worse. But to Mariah's point, I think if you meet people in the real realm, most of us don't wake up with that partisan intention in our heart. We can get pushed into it, but we don't wake up that way. So I guess it's a long-winded answer. But again, I think it comes down to create the construct where people can actually operate as a first name, and we can get more into what's driving the polarity in this conversation if you'd like as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm starting to sense some themes. Kate, I'm curious what your impressions and thoughts are to that question as far as polarization, and has it gotten harder for you?
I think it has. It is difficult. I was thinking about how Mariah was talking about building trust right at the beginning, what you were sharing, Mariah, and that is something that is a big part of what Nate's work has done, and as you got me thinking about a lot of the programming that we did at the Humphrey School and that we do at the Citizens League, it really is about trying to weave in opportunities throughout that experience that people may be having with each other to build some kind of trust or tentative, at least being willing to make space for others to coexist with you and to share in ideas or perspectives into the space. We've actually started using the word multi-partisan at the Citizens League rather than bipartisan or nonpartisan, because political ideologies right now are like a crazy kaleidoscope of perspectives all over the place. And to get sorted into one side, right or left, red or blue, it didn't really seem to fit. And when you say nonpartisan, yes, my organization is nonpartisan, but the people that we enter into relationship with and that we invite to enter into relationship with each other, majority of them are not nonpartisan. They have partisan perspectives. And so to say multi-partisan, I think it frames that you are coming into the space with different perspectives and ideologies that we can then explore. But to this discussion thread of what makes it more challenging, I think right now over the last couple of years, there's really been this rise of narrative that those who are not with you are absolutely against you and are actually out to destroy you, and that therefore you must destroy them or win at all costs, that sort of mentality. And I don't mean to minimize there are actual there's actual hatred and actual desire to harm. That's real. And so I don't want to minimize that at all. But there's also a lot of narrative that is just kind of destroy the other side, that is not helpful. there's some really cool opportunities when you can get legislators, people who have served in legislative roles, together to talk after they've served. And we do this a lot at the Citizens League for some programming that we hold for our member organizations. And we'll get former legislators, Margaret Anderson Kelleher and Kurt Zellers, who both were speaker, Republican and Democrat. Or just a couple weeks ago, we had Jennifer Loon, who had served as a Republican, and Jeff Hayden, who served as a Democrat, moderated a discussion with them. And yeah, they were on different sides of the political aisle, but when you get them to sit down in conversation, they met, Jennifer and Jeff had met at their orientation when they first were in the legislature. They had a good relationship. They had respect for each other. And we love at the Citizens League to lift that up and show those examples that it does happen. It is possible. It's not what you see in the news, and it certainly isn't out there being tweeted, but it's really happening. These are real people, and they're real people with concerns and personalities. And when they can connect on a human level, as we've been saying, it really, it makes a difference.
And folks, please, if you do have a question, chime in, put it in the chat. Would love to hear from you. I have plenty of questions and even more after hearing some of your answers, but I'd love to hear from all of you as well. Kate, just a quick follow-up to what you mentioned, just when you're getting these past legislators together and they have this trust and they have this respect. Is it, why aren't we seeing that? Or is it simply because maybe the news media, it's a better story than they're pulled apart, or is it more nuanced, or how would you say?
It's kind of what Nate was saying. I mean, it doesn't feed the rage monster. And when you're seeing, Shannon's offering to tweet the partisan cooperation. It's just, that's not the clickbait, unfortunately. It's not what gets people riled up.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of stoking of rage and stoking of fear. And really, I see what we have going on right now as there's a lot of fear, and a lot of it is legitimate fear of being unable to thrive economically and build a good life for oneself and one's family. That's real. It's real fear. And when that is, it's really easy to stoke more fear and to cast to cast blame on who's causing what and creating that type of threat to people. So anyway.
I want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in on that, because I mean, there's kind of an elephant in the room. And again, I think it's the business model of the political parties themselves. They are multi-billion-dollar industries now. And when I say not just the parties, it's the political media around our political parties. And division and labels are part of the equation. My dear friend, Dean Phillips, when he went to Washington, we knew this was going to be the case, but we had no idea how bad it was. You actually get punished as a freshman legislator for going out and meeting people from the opposing party. The parties themselves want to keep you in the world of labels because it's easy to hate a label. Mariah, I know you do a lot, in your work around like neuroscience, but what we're dealing with is like the easiest card trick in the world to play on the human brain. Evolutionarily speaking, we're about 15 minutes removed from being hairless apes in a world that was really good at killing us. We are fear-based, threat-based brains at our rawest right now. So the political machines are really about stoking anxiety, converting that into fear, and then giving you someone a label to blame. One of the issues is that we don't have political seasons anymore. We used to, we used to have a political season, and then that was a way and we could actually get to the work of the people. But we have 24/7 politics going on right now. So compromise is really frightening. Compromising with Mariah is really frightening. Not because I'm frightened of her, I'm actually frightened of my own family. I'm going to get a primary challenge if I'm seen as anything other than doctrinaire. And that's actually the construct that we've created under the Kliegelites, where we're in public. Now in private, we can actually emerge our humanity, but we actually have sunshine laws that, prevent a lot of that kind of activity. And what Kate is referring to is common with legislators who are no longer in office. And that's actually the problem, is that public policy making is taking a back seat to politics, and politics just never ends.
I think that all those things that you both are saying are true. There's so many headwinds that are pulling us apart, including our own sort of hardwiring that makes us lean towards being groupish, particularly when we feel under threat, and the media and politics and money in politics. And there's all these headwinds. But I will say a couple things that I think are positive, which are my office facilitates the Civility Caucus at the legislature. And on a regular basis, we hold events that turn out large numbers of bipartisan, bicameral legislators who sit there and say, we don't like this, we don't want it to be this way. It's not that they're not partisan, they're legislators, they're partisan, that's why they decided to run. But I hear every day that they don't want it to be this way. But the headwinds are so great. There's so many forces pulling them apart. And then, our different shops, all of us on this call, including Shannon, we all provide a little bit of physical space, a little bit of time, a little bit of food that enables people to get together. But it's a lot to counter. But I do think, so I think that's positive, that even our legislators who are partisan want it to be better and different, even if, they don't take every step, to make it that way. But I believe that they want it to be better and different, very many, if not all of them. And I think as much as we're hardwired for getting afraid and then getting groupish and creating others, I think there's lots of evidence out there that human beings are also hardwired to be very social and to be very good to each other. And that's what we are most of the time, right? Most people are, doing the right thing most of the time. And so how can we create some systems that capitalize on that, the way that the media right now is capitalizing on our fear? How can we build on those, better angels of our nature that are just as real, to support people who are trying to do it better? So I don't have an answer to that, but I think that offers some hope.
No, I love that, Mariah. I think it's a good time to mention a great program that my former colleagues at the Humphrey School held for many, many years, and I hope that they bring it back. It was called the One Minnesota Retreat, and it was a full day retreat for the state legislators, the House and Senate members from both political parties in Minnesota, to spend the entire day, 8 to 5, at the University of Minnesota. It was the only time the entire year that both parties, both chambers, had an opportunity to be together, just learning, getting to know each other, spending time together. It was funded by private foundations, and so it was at no cost to legislators, and they were able to come and spend that time together. And we would regularly get 1/2 to 2/3 of legislators from the whole legislature would come. So it was a wonderful program. And cheers to my former colleagues who are still at Humphrey. They do great work, and I do hope to see that event come back.
And Jay, I would say, that's actually the answer. What Mariah and Kate are talking about is that we all need to watch our digital diet, and we need to find ourselves in these analog spaces, again, where we become first names to one another. And that takes conversation that goes beyond policy, beyond politics. It actually we have to talk as human beings that live full, dimensional, contextualized lives, so we can actually find those connection points. Mariah, you're absolutely right. The human brain has this amazing paradox. We look at the world initially through us versus them and me versus you, but we are so quick to want to turn them into an us, because again, evolutionarily speaking, being alone in the jungle is the most dangerous place as well, right? So we do have an impulse to gather. It's just that when we gather under a political lens, or when we gather in this digital environment, that's where the headwinds are. When you actually create a place of generosity and reciprocity, my experience is that you get some really great behavior.
And it's not that hard to do in real life. It's not as hard as folks might think, given it is really hard to do in virtual spaces. Not impossible, but it is a challenge.
I want to piggyback off that, because you're talking about some of the things that we can do. as you're facing some headwinds. Clearly, you all have had some success in facing those headwinds. And I'm curious what, real world application, so many people, I can speak for myself, say, well, what can I do? What can me do? I'm not in these spaces that you're in. How can I be better? How can I bring people together in my little corner of the world? Are there any real world applications that you all have learned in your professional lives that might actually help all of us in our personal lives?
I'll jump in. And the answer is an emphatic yes, because at the end of the day, it's really about the art of human interaction. And what we see in our political circles is really a caricaturization of human beings when they're not being human beings, they're being partisans. So one of them, and I apologize for getting a little flaky here, but that's what I am. We're all walking around with our own truths. And again, the digital environment has allowed us to reinforce our biases around this is my truth. And we put, Mariah, I think it was you who said, that we're putting more and more of our personal identity behind it. Growing up, you might have a yard sign that said support our teachers, but now the yard sign says I support teachers, right? So we're putting our own ego behind these truths, and we're arguing around this noun. We're forgetting the verb of acting truthfully. So one of the real world applications is actually to inject curiosity. It's more than just kindness. It's more than civility, is to actually practice curiosity. You think differently than I do. That's interesting. How did you come about those views? What are you reading that I'm not reading? We don't have those kinds of conversations as much as we used to, because we not only have this digital environment, but this is a kind of a plug for my two co-speakers or speakers tonight in the organizations that they're running, is that we're running out of these analog spaces. So we used to gather, Robert Putnam talked about this years ago in Bowling Alone, but we used to gather in our churches, mosques, and synagogues more than we do now, or Rotary clubs or country clubs or whatever it was. We used to mix it up with more diversity than we are right now. So places like the Citizens League that has been at this for 70 years become even more important, because it is that analog location to meet someone different than you and act curious.
Curiosity is such a powerful tool, isn't it? Kate, go ahead.
And well, I was just going to encourage Mariah to consider Curiosity Caucus rather than Civility Caucus.
We have a long-standing dialogue about what the name should be that Kate's aware of.
So now Nate has a new idea.
Go ahead, Kate. No.
I love that curiosity. And I heard some quote ages ago that always stuck with me, which is everyone you meet loves something, has lost something, and is afraid of something. And if you can be curious about those things, it immediately takes off. It lifts that curtain of fear and othering. So I think as an individual, yes, curiosity, checking one's own assumptions. But I think we need to remember that we are not just operating on an individual level. There are systems level forces that are keeping people apart and that are creating the gaps and divides between us. And in particular, when it comes to people whose voices have historically not been as included in public policy making, there are some walls that need to be broken through and broken down. There's a program that I'm really proud of that the Citizens League has been running for 6 years called Capital Pathways, where we have paid internships for students who are Black, Indigenous, or other folks of color, college students, to work at the state capitol in legislative roles. And we not only support the cohort of students that are in these internships, but work also with the host locations. And these are nonprofits, businesses, legislative offices that are hosting the students, to encourage that dialogue of how do we get to know each other? How do we start to see each other and hear our unique voices in this space? And the goal being to ensure that policymaking and the legislature is really reflective of the racial and ethnic diversity of our state. And we do that still in a multi-partisan way, where we have different political perspectives at the table and is embedded into part of that program. But that is one system way that we are addressing relationships and trying to create a stronger and more robust legislative and policymaking community in Minnesota.
Mm.
Yeah, that is, of course, absolutely true. And there are all kinds of these headwinds and systemic issues. And at the personal level, if you're not involved in an institution that's doing that work, or, can donate and all of those things. But on an individual level, we hear a lot about being in our echo chambers and being in our bubbles. And I do think that's true. And I do think that there's value in practicing disagreeing well in discourse with people who think differently than yourself. And in today's world, it can take an awful lot of work to find people sometimes who see things differently than you. And so I think seeking those folks out and then focusing more on understanding or curiosity, as Nate said, rather than agreement. I don't think it's so important to agree, like, especially, in this context, we're talking about policy issues. There should be different ideas about policy issues. These are complex things. How do you address, all the big issues that we have, right? Whether it's long-term care, economic growth, or, homelessness, these are big, challenging issues. We should have different ideas about them. So it's okay to stay in a space of disagreement, but to have that curiosity and figure out where is someone coming from, and recognizing that as much as my story and my reasoning makes sense to me, theirs makes just as much sense to them, and coming to understand how their story makes as much sense to them as my story makes to me is not the same as agreeing. Doesn't mean I'm accepting that or going along with it, but it's a whole lot more pleasant for one thing, and it preserves relationships, whether those are personal family relationships or those are professional working relationships. So I do think Nate's right on that you can sum that up into just staying in a place of curiosity, really seeking to understand somebody else's perspective just for the value of understanding it. And then solutions do flow from that, because you don't actually have to agree to then find solutions. Because if you think that the other side is, evil and no good and up to all kinds of crazy stuff and doesn't have any values, then working with them means you're supporting something that's not so good, right? But if you can recognize that, okay, I might not agree with them, but they have value, they're coming at this from, a place of some values and goals that I agree with at the big picture level, then we can work together and we can find a path forward. So focusing on, again, that understanding, that curiosity. And there's I'll plug just a couple of really specific ways to do that. There's a really good book called Love Your Enemies by a man named Arthur Brooks, who is at the American Enterprise Institute and left to kind of make this his mission. And there's really specific, concrete tips, and he has books and podcasts and all kinds of stuff. And there's a bunch of organizations that help bring people together if you either don't have people in your life who have different perspectives than you, or you're having trouble working through those perspectives with, people in your family or your community. There's an organization called Braver Angels that does workshops for bringing reds and blues, they call them, together, or teaching you how to have depolarizing conversations within your family. There's another one called Living Room Conversations. Both of those organizations have a Minnesota presence and have structured workshops and trainings and dialogues you can get involved with. So I think all of us building our civic muscles and our capacity to disagree well is part of what we can all do as individuals.
Jay, you asked for practical things that we can do in our lives, and I'm going to finish this with, maybe it's a little provocative, but I know that both Kate and from what I'm hearing from Mariah, you guys practice this too, but don't underestimate the power of breaking bread or having a drink with someone. Hospitality does bring out our better angels. And I would encourage people to think about not only meeting people from the quote unquote other side, but to allow the patient conversation that doesn't really get to that first and foremost. Again, contextualizing one another as human beings, knowing each other's stories is so important. So that's why hospitality is so important, is that we have a different culture when we're breaking bread with one another. And here's where it gets maybe a little provocative. If we really wanted to do, now this isn't like a magic bullet, but you need to get rid of the gift ban in the legislature, or at least modify it massively. There was a time not that long ago where legislators would fight like cats and dogs, and then they'd go have dinner together. And when they were at dinner, because I hosted a lot of these dinners, they weren't talking about the debate that morning. They were actually talking about their kids. They were talking about their favorite movie or the concert that they can't wait to go to. And what we've done with the gift ban is we've taken away a major way that legislators used to interact as human beings. And we've left this vacuum that only allows them to interact as party labels with one another. And then we actually have to give rise to things like what Mariah is sitting on. And thankfully she has a location like that. Thankfully, we have a Citizens League, but we've kind of stripped away so many tools that we had in the Capitol that were really great at humanizing the individuals in those seats. And without that human being, all we're left with is a label.
You know, Nate, I came into this conversation thinking about exactly this, about the ban on, if I wonder for folks who may not be in the loop on this, essentially what we're talking about is a ban on, it would be usually lobbyists or other folks interested in connecting with legislators, paying for meals, essentially, meals or kind of off the clock time for legislators to get together. And it definitely restricts lobbying, but as Shannon is joking here, no lobbyists can play an entire vote with a steak dinner. People can't be bought by a hamburger, but the hosting of those gatherings by advocates or lobbyists looking to get to know the legislators was actually having the effect of helping the legislators get to know each other better and see each other as people and as real humans. And an interesting paradox, I think, an example of the motivation was not nefarious, but there was a negative result of that decision.
And, you know, I feel like it's a little above my pay grade whether, you know, there were problems with the gift ban or not, you know, in terms of money and politics, but whether the gift ban should be removed or not, I don't know, but definitely I know from my direct experience helping legislators that they need more time and space together. And so another way to do that would be for, you know, corporations, donors, philanthropy to invest more in creating those spaces for legislators, because they're not going to do it for themselves, because it's not politically viable for legislators to allocate money to themselves for their own activities. But I know from lots of conversations with them that there is a huge desire for more professional development, for more social time, for more physical space in the Capitol. You know, I think a lot of folks in the public would be surprised to know that they're segregated in their building by floor. The way that they sit on the floor is segregated. They use different restrooms, you know, so I would love to see, you know, foundations, donors, and others investing in helping legislators build their capacity too. I mean, we need to do that all sort of across our society at the community level and at the political level, but it's needed in my experience at that level too. And it takes money wherever it's going to come from. People need those spaces to get set up and built, and food to be there, and people to be brought in to provide training and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and we've all dabbled in that a bit. It's challenging. Plus, there's not a lot of time in their schedule. You know, remember we have a part-time legislature, so they are running a whole regular career outside of their legislative role. And the couple months that they have at the Capitol together is like every minute is scheduled, and so it's tough to get time, even for basic training and orientation at in the role, which is a really hard role. And so there isn't a lot of time left. But as Mariah said, and we have both been in rooms where we've heard legislators say, like, we would give anything to be able to have more time together, including with people of the other party, the other chamber, to get to know them, get to know what they're up to, what they're interested in. They don't get a lot of that time. And sorry, Jay, you were going to jump in.
No, I was going to say that it reminds me a little bit of what Nate was talking about earlier about the business model. Granted, there's much more to the business model than that, but just of this ability to really take the time to get to know one another sounds kind of boring, but it clearly is so important.
I'll tell you, it's anything but boring. I'm not naive. I know that we're not going to get rid of political parties and political advertising and whatnot, but what we can get rid of is the vacuum that it exists in. When, you know, we did this for years at Studio E, we would bring in pairs of legislators, a Republican and a Democrat. It was a program called Many One. And there were a couple things that went on there. One is that they got to know each other on a first name basis. The second is they were surrounded by people who didn't give a crap that they were representatives. They were just another person in the crowd, and we put them in a position to learn together. All those things that Mariah and Kate were just talking about, it's not that expensive. The benefits would be so much greater. And I'm not unsympathetic to the idea that these are very, very busy people and they're having work-life balance issues and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, I mean, I've played around with these ideas. Have a family picnic. You want people to get along with one another? Have them watch their children play with one another. It's not boring. It actually is the most delicious part about being a human being is to connect this way. Yeah. What's boring is actually all the partisanship, because you know how every episode ends.
You can plug in the sound bites, you know what they're going to say.
It's bad reality TV.
I would I'd offer another practice that I'd encourage folks to consider, which is there is a place for the type of fierce advocacy and agenda pushing that we see on lots of issues and in lots of spaces. There's a place for that. I mean, there are issues and causes that need fierce advocacy, and there's a lot of fierceness out there that is not needed. And so my encouragement to you is, unless you are actually fiercely advocating for a specific thing that you have decided is really important to you, don't feed the machine of the fierceness. Just like step away from it a little bit. The glomming on to try and destroy the social media image of some person who may hold some different view. Like, it's not accomplishing anything, and it's not it doesn't really feel good, and it's not getting us where we need to be.
And we're coming up close to our time. We're not there yet, so if all of you out there have a question, please put it into the chat, and I will ask it. The one question now leading up to everything that you have all talked about so eloquently is, so often we talk about, what's broken and how to fix it, which is important. Obviously, that's an important conversation. But is there anything, and some of you have touched on this already, but is there anything in your world right now that is working, that when it comes to bringing people together, that maybe us here on this call can build on?
Yeah, I think the Citizens League is working. I've been a member of it forever and ever and ever. From what I read about what Mariah's doing, that's working too. And I think actually that's more than, there's these islands. Is actually what's working is that there is a workable formula. We actually know how to do this. And to what Kate's talking about the fierceness, you're absolutely right, Kate. There are places to do that, but not every place is the place to do that. What Mariah is talking about is what works is disagreeing and not being disagreeable at the same time. And the way to do that, again, is what works is to actually create this space to get to know the person in front of you. So I think we can do that in our own neighborhoods. We can do that wherever we go. We can actually practice what works. And as Mariah was saying earlier about the human need to connect, again, let's play with what we have. We have people who want to connect. Most people, unless you are literally a dyed-in-the-wool partisan that gets paid to be partisan, don't wake up in the morning that way. So let's just create the space around us to connect. It's not that hard. We just have to be intentional.
Yeah, I second that. I think Nate's right. What you hear a lot of repetition among the three of us, I think, about building trust, building relationships, taking the time, knowing each other in our multifacetedness, right? As a parent, as a member of the community, as all the different things that we are, a person who likes this activity or that activity, a Twins fan, whatever. Identifying our shared goals, our shared values. Almost everybody agrees that, they want the world to be fair and honest and kind, and, finding all those commonalities, taking time, having dialogue, being curious, like we know what works. So I think there has been sort of an explosion in this space of organizations that are trying to help us build bridges and kind of rebuild our social fabric as we are and as we're feeling so divided, and Majority in the Middle is one of those organizations. I mean, across the country, I mentioned Braver Angels and Living Room Conversations. There's just a proliferation of them. And so I think taking those things that are working and elevating them like we're doing here tonight, connecting them like we're doing here tonight, and also resourcing them, you know, folks in philanthropy and donors. And I think folks in the private sector who want their state legislatures or the federal government to work better have an opportunity to invest in these kinds of organizations that know what works and can help us rebuild our capacity to disagree well and work well against difference and find common ground and all of those things. So I think it's a mistake to believe that we're, you know, irreparably divided and throw up our hands. If we talk too much about that, it causes people to give up hope, and I don't think that's necessary. There are strong headwinds, but it's not the way people want it to be. It's not the way most people are, as Nate says, when they wake up in the morning. So we just need to elevate and multiply those things that are working.
True, I agree with all of that. We at the Citizens League just finished a really intense project this past winter and early spring in the city of St. Paul, convening a group that Mayor Carter named 48 people to dig in on the public safety challenge in St. Paul and look at alternatives to lower level non-urgent 911 calls. And my amazing colleague Amanda and I had the task of leading 48 people that represented, speaking of kaleidoscopes, a kaleidoscope of different perspectives, everything from advocates to faith leaders to law enforcement folks, officers and nonprofits and education. And there were high school students, and we had this huge group. And we did all of the things that we've been talking about tonight. We spent time building trust, getting to know people by their names, hearing people's stories and backgrounds, creating space in small groups, even virtually, every time that we met, for people in small groups to hear how they were doing, hear how the events of the moment were impacting them. And as y'all remember, it was a really intense spring here in the Twin Cities, and I had a chance to hear directly from each other, a high school student, a law enforcement officer, you know, how are you experiencing this moment? And then we learned together. And that was another thing that I heard Nate, I think, say, when you learn side by side with someone, even if it's challenging, even if it's a bumpy road and you're really questioning what you're learning, you're moving in the same direction together, which is better than moving in different directions apart. So you're moving somewhere together. And then we worked through a process to come up with some recommendations at the end. It was very difficult. There were some very strained moments. There were challenges. There were lots of strong emotions, which we welcomed into the space, and we made it. You know, we got through, and Mayor Carter actually used a lot of what the group came up with in his 2022 budget for the city of St. Paul. So I'm really proud of that work, because I think it was a great example of all the things we've been talking about here, where you've got some of the thorniest and most strained issues that we are facing in our communities right now. There is a way through. There is a way through. And I'm grateful to my colleagues here for modeling that alongside me.
That's wonderful. And what I'm hearing from all of you, really, there are these processes. They've worked. You've used them before, and really all we need to do is go back and use them again. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy.
No, it's not easy. Yeah,
but it does mean forward movement.
Yeah. And as Mariah said, and I love you, Mariah, for keeping saying this, like, they have to be resourced. Like, if you have a good process that works well to bring people together and move through challenging issues, you know, you can shake the money tree as much as you want, but like those things need to have support behind them. And so thank you to everybody who supports those efforts in their community.
Great. Kate, Mariah, Nate, I appreciate everything you've talked about tonight. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this. So thank you. Obviously, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So from now on, we'll send it back to Shannon.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay.
Welcome.
I would like to say thank you to Jay for moderating a really good discussion. I don't know if you've all had this experience. I have had bad moderators in my professional life, and I've had good ones, and Jay is definitely one of the good ones, and it does make a difference in the conversation. So thank you so much for that.